Thank you all very much, and welcome to our Facebook Live show here for Pro Football Weekly. We really appreciate everybody coming out. We are on the World Wide Web, I guess they call it, so we have no idea at the moment how many folks are joining us and where they're joining us from. Our experience with these things is that we may be starting a little small, but we should be adding hundreds and hopefully thousands as we go on in the next half hour or so. And for starters, we want to thank all of you so much for coming out tonight. For those of you who are not with us here in Crystal Lake, just a little bit north of Chicago, we are at the Rib House out in Crystal Lake, our great host tonight. And thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. I'm going to have a hard time getting through the half hour, guys, because it smelled so good walking in here. I think we may have to eat before we're done. But we really appreciate everybody coming out. What we're going to do, because we're based here in Chicago, is we're going to start with a little Bears free agency talk. But again, Pro Football Weekly is kind of known as the authority on professional football, cover the entire NFL, countrywide, worldwide. So we will talk about the entire National Football League. Probably should tell you first who we are. My name is Hub Arkish, and I am the editor and general manager. I've been at Pro Football Weekly since before God invented dirt, and it's actually 39 years. I'm going to celebrate my 40th anniversary on the beat in about 5 or 6 months. Our senior NFL editor and senior Chicago Bears beat reporter is Kevin Fishbane. Kevin has been with us for quite a while now as well. And at the other end of the table, he has no choice. He was born into it. That's Arthur Arkish. And Arthur is our senior NFL reporter. Arthur's actually been over a decade at Pro Football Weekly as well. And guys, we have a ton of fun getting to do this. We became part of Shaw Media in 2013. And really, we're trying to basically launch a regional version of Pro Football Weekly. And fortunately, the good folks at Shaw said, wait a minute, why don't we do the whole thing? And so we relaunched Pro Football Weekly about 1.5 years ago and have been really excited and pleased with the way things have started to take off for us again. One of the reasons that things go well is because we do know a little bit about the NFL. We spend all of our time talking about it. And today, actually, or I guess tomorrow, the beginning of free agency in the National Football League. They will begin tagging franchise players.
The numbers have been down. I think we see these flashes that tell us that very few players in the NFL can do what Alshon Jeffrey does. And, you know, I think at times when Brian Hoyer was in the game and Matt Barkley, they didn't necessarily give him the looks that Jay Cutler would, and I don't know how that impacted his numbers. But the fact is, you know, it's not like he's going to he doesn't have the speed to beat teams downfield. He's only an outside guy, and Brandon Marshall could use him in the slot a little bit. But he just has that tantalizing skill that you watch him go up and get those balls, and few guys in the league are capable of doing what he can do.
Yeah, I think you take it a step further than that. He is arguably the best contested ball catcher in the NFL. I've talked to teams, other teams, scouts, GMs who will tell you that, and that is something that you pay for. But I think what this comes back to is the decision between the franchise tag, Arthur, and the long-term deal. He was in a contract year and did everything not to earn the long-term deal. It's not just the 4-game suspension. You know, listen, I don't think Alshon's a cheater. I believe it was an accident. This happens. It's happened to a lot of great players in the NFL. They just didn't read the ingredients closely enough. I mean, how many of us have not read the ingredients closely enough? We're just not getting tested for it. So I don't think that's an issue. Even the 4 games that he lost because of it, I think it's an accident. The problem is the 12 games he played. And the reality is he simply was not a #1 receiver in those games. You know he has the ability to be, and what really complicates this is you have no idea at this point what and who Kevin White is. Because if you knew that Kevin White was the guy you were expecting when you used the 7th overall pick in the draft on him, then you would not be considering either signing him to a long-term deal or giving him a franchise tag.
Yeah, and frankly, I think that just comes down to Ryan Pace's bad luck. At least that's my opinion. Some people want to say, oh, he should have known Kevin White was going to break the same leg twice in his first 2 years in the league. That's silly. It was a fluky accident that happened twice, and it's just the luck of the draw. But if you go back 2 years to Alshon's, he was the franchise designation last year. 2 years ago, he's in an actual contract year, and he has all the soft tissue ailments. And there were, you know, some pretty good sound bites from John Fox in year 1 of that regime, believe it or not, about owies versus legitimate injuries. And you just, at least it's in the back of my head. And I'm not saying they're questioning Alshon's toughness or dedication, but I do think that these are all factors that are certainly at play when you're getting ready to give a guy whatever we're talking about here, 40 million guaranteed. So it's tough, and it's certainly going to set the stage for the rest of the offseason. But I think, as Kevin kind of teased, there is another order of business. It doesn't really matter if you have Alshon if you don't know who's throwing him the football, and that's kind of certainly the biggest decision. Alshon is 1B, but Ryan Pace has spent 15 draft picks as an NFL decision maker. None of them have been at the quarterback position, so that's not bad luck. He's kind of backed himself into a corner this offseason at that position. At least that's what I think. I don't know if you guys disagree.
Yeah, I just want to go back to one thing about Alshon Jeffrey. One thing to remember, if they do move on from him, there is no receiver they can sign in free agency that can do anywhere close to what he does. They're not going to draft a wide receiver in the first or second or probably the third round. So they're going to bank on Kevin White. They're going to bank on Cameron Meredith to be that guy. And maybe those guys will be able to be, those types of players that are able to make up for that. And also remember, this is a franchise that, traded Martellus Bennett, traded Brandon Marshall, let Matt Forte walk. So this is a team that's already given up a lot of offensive production over the last 2 years for a variety of reasons. I'm not disagreeing with those decisions, but then if you move on from him, again, you're putting a lot of confidence in Kevin White's recovery. And hey, we all hope Kevin White comes back and is a great player, but that's putting a lot of confidence in him. You mentioned Brian Hoyer. His red zone numbers were not very good. I mean, those games, you guys remember the game against the Jaguars that they blew, the game against the Colts, he had Jeffrey wide open down the left sideline on that fourth down play. I mean, those are throws that you got, those are plays you got to make, and he's got to score more points. It's great they didn't turn the ball over, but I think he only won one game.
Which was a 17-14 gift from the Detroit Lions,
yes.
by the way, yeah.
So, I think Hoyer's going to be an option. I think you mentioned Connor, they have Connor Shaw, you mentioned Matt Barkley as an option. There are other veterans they could look at. Arthur, a lot of this comes down to who does trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, because if it's the Browns or 49ers, there's a domino effect there. Who does take a quarterback, one or two? Does a team like the Jets trade up and draft another quarterback? There's a lot of things that could go down. I think it all comes down to Ryan Pace and which quarterback is he in love with. And which quarterback does he think, if he thinks it's Jimmy Garoppolo, if he says, Jimmy Garoppolo's my guy, he gives Bill Belichick whatever he wants. If he thinks it's Deshaun Watson, Mitch Trubisky, Deshaun Kaiser, you use the number 3 pick on one of those guys. But that is the great unknown, and the dominoes start to fall in 3 weeks from Thursday when Garoppolo could technically be traded.
We know at least one of those two teams in front of the Bears, the 49ers, certainly have a longer leash, if you will. They just hired a whole new regime with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. They got matching 6-year contracts, which is totally unprecedented in the NFL. So they're not feeling the pressure that I believe the Browns and the Bears are. And I think there's probably a little more pressure on John Fox even entering year 3 than maybe there is on Ryan Pace. So Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be 26 years old. He's got about 119, might not even be that many, maybe 100 career pass attempts. He's an Eastern Illinois guy. Yes, Ryan Pace went to Eastern Illinois. They've had a conversation when the two teams met last August and had joint practices in Foxborough. So there are dots to connect. I think the number 3 overall pick is too rich, and I really like Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think he has a chance to be special, but I still don't think that that's the right price. I would like to think the Bears are finding a way to consider dangling their 2017 first rounder, which they hope isn't going to be a premium top 5 pick, obviously, because they have to be more competitive. And the Bears do have an extra 4th rounder in this year's draft, so a lot of moving parts, as Kevin said. But if you think Garoppolo is the guy, as Kevin also just mentioned, I guess you go out and get him. I just think number 3 overall is probably a little too rich. And we should mention, I should add to all this, Brian Hoyer and Matt Barkley, they're going to be 2 of the top 5 options available on the market for 31 other teams. So that just provides...
You forgot Josh McCown again.
Josh McCown is going to be somewhere on this list as well, not in the top 5. But that's all the perspective you probably need on this. It speaks to the shortage at the quarterback position and why jobs are lost and why rash decisions are made every year, and they're going to be again this year.
All right, guys, we'll circle back to the Bears quarterback issues and the Bears in the draft in a few minutes. But on the free agency topic, and it's a reasonably safe bet, at least here at the Rib House with us, that we know there's a lot of Bears fans. We know there's probably some Packers fans. We know there's no Bears and Packers fans, okay? But the reality is, particularly out north here, there's a lot of Packer fans. And if you want to talk about a team with some real free agency issues and decisions to make, how do you like this list? Julius Peppers, T.J. Lang, Nick Perry, Jared Cook, Dayton Jones, Eddie Lacy, Kristen Michael, Don Barclay, J.C. Treader, and Micah Hyde. every one of them a significant contributor to that football team, and a team without nearly the cap space as the Chicago Bears. And their decision points kind of start, Kevin, really with T.J. Lang at guard. They just let Josh Sitton go a year ago, and then Eddie Lacy at running back. What are they going to do with those two players?
Yeah, I mean, though it's amazing you rattle off that list. That offensive side of the ball, they'd love to be able to have the Eddie Lacy that we saw at the start of the season, the Eddie Lacy we saw 2 years ago. But can they have that Eddie Lacy? That Eddie Lacy is in better shape. Is Jason Spriggs ready to slide in for T.J. Lang? Probably not. But though, T.J. Lang might cost a lot of money. Jared Cook's an interesting one. Arthur, you broke down the Packers free agents, and you talked about how Jared Cook should kind of be atop the list, which is kind of interesting when you look at those guys. A lot of those guys are guys that Packers drafted. Jared Cook's like the one free agent that Ted Thompson signed in his 89 years as GM of the Packers, and he turned out to be a pretty good player. Obviously, we saw what he did with the big catch at the end of the Cowboys game. Right. So you put him atop that list, maybe ahead of Lacy and T.J. Lang?
I did, yeah. It's amazing to think about when you look back at how historically bad the Packers' defense was down the stretch, and the fact that 3 of their 4 outside linebackers are free agents in Nick Perry and Julius Peppers and Dayton Jones. Look at what Ted Thompson doesn't go into free agency, but the last 3 times he got Jared Cook, Julius Peppers, and Letroy Guion, who have turned into, they were really nice players for the Packers. So people are wondering if maybe he will dip his toe in the water a little bit more and go out and get a big name. But yeah, I put Jared Cook at the top of our list basically because Aaron Rodgers told me to. Within 1 hour of the NFC title game being over, he was already stumping for Jared Cook's return. So I think that's pretty telling. And I think the elements that he added to that offense this year, he wasn't healthy. He missed like 6 games, I think. But as Kevin said, you saw what he can do in the playoffs. And it's not a good tight end year in free agency. It's a really good one in the draft. But it looks like Cook will be a priority. And then I look at those pass rushers. Eddie Lacy isn't getting more than a 1-year deal because he can't control himself, frankly. I mean, he's hovering at 250 pounds every time he's told he can't. And I say this, I know how hard it is to not be hovering at 250 pounds, but I don't have multi-year contracts being dangled in front of me either. So I think he's a 1-year contract candidate. Julius Peppers is as well. But yeah, there's a ton of decisions for them to try to stay atop the NFC North, where they've been, 6 of the past 7 years now.
Yeah, Ted Thompson's first foray into free agency, I can't remember if it was 05 when he took the job or 06, was a guy named Charles Woodson, who'll be going into the Hall of Fame in 4 years. So he obviously knows a little bit about what he's doing here. Julius Peppers in particular is fascinating, guys. He was not jettisoned in Chicago because he couldn't play anymore. He wasn't a problem. He was a great guy. They just felt that they were rebuilding some things and it was time to move on. He started there a little slowly, but Kevin, he is 37 years old. He has not announced yet whether he wants to play again or retire. But the reality is, during that playoff run, during that 8-game win streak to end the season, Julius Peppers was the most impactful player on that Packer defense. And so it's going to be really interesting to see what they do there. My guess is they're going to offer him 1 year, and he's going to insist on 2, and we'll see, how they work that out. They probably will agree to 2 if he's willing to play because it helps him spread the guaranteed money a little bit.
Yeah, I think somebody should bring Julius Peppers in for a year or 2. Packers would certainly need. You mentioned, we have Nick Perry on this list. You have Dayton Jones on this list. They need pass rushers. They're going to need help there. It's probably a position they're going to look at in the draft. You bring Peppers back, then that makes it easier for you. But there's a lot of teams, I think, that would love to bring in Julius Peppers. The question is, how much does he think he can make at this age? And you mentioned he's going to want 2 years. He's going to want as much guaranteed money as he can get. Although Julius Peppers made a lot of money over his career, so you wonder if he'll give a discount to anybody. But I'd be curious to see what the Packers do with Pep, Big Pep.
Can I just throw one name out there because I've already written it in a couple places? I think Julius Peppers is going to play for the Patriots next year because I think it's a Patriots type of move. I didn't know we had Patriots fans here. We have one. Congratulations. It just makes too much sense to me. And again, he hasn't decided whether he's going to play a 16th season, but it's still very obvious that he can get the job done in a situational role. And Bill Belichick has made a career out of maximizing those types of guys and is a big part of the reason they won that 5th Super Bowl.
Plus, you put Peppers with Shea McClellin, and you got, one of the best linebacking cores in the game.
Yeah, you put Peppers with Shea McClellin, and you got Peppers. So let's take a look. You only get better, guys, if you beat the teams in your division. And so now we'll move to the Minnesota Vikings. And see, the reason the Bears are in so much better shape in free agency is because they don't have as many good football players. It's not hard to figure out. But the Vikings have also got some real issues. Matt Khalil was drafted 4 years ago to be their franchise left tackle. He never became that player. He's been injured the last 2 years. He is a free agent. They are desperate at the position, and so they've got a real tough call to make there. You look at Captain Munnerlyn, who they brought in this year as a backup corner, not so exciting. Andre Smith was brought in to handle the right tackle spot. He went down for the season. He is a free agent. Chad Greenway has been their most dependable player on defense for a decade now. He's 34 years old. Terrence Newman, a 36-year-old cornerback. I take it back, 38-year-old cornerback. Then you got Cordero Patterson. You got Matt Asiata on the list. And these are guys that are, significant contributors. And so once again, the Vikings, in kind of desperation, not rebuild mode, but plug-in mode to be the team we thought they were going to be before it came apart this year, have some tough free agency decisions to make as well.
Arthur, I'll defer this one to you, Mr. NFC North.
The name that sticks out to me on that list is actually Cordero Patterson. He didn't really pan out as a skill player in Minnesota as a former first-rounder, but he's been one of the best kick returners in football the past couple years, and still has a lot of upside. So I don't know if he'll be back with the Vikings or not, but I think that he's going to appeal to a lot of teams who think that they can still take his game to the next level. But for the Vikings, it's pretty easy for me. The defense is ready to win right now, and they need to rebuild the offensive line. It's the same thing they tried to do last offseason. Hub said signing Andre Smith, that didn't work. So now he'll be gone. Matt Khalil maybe will be back, actually, as unremarkable as he's been since his rookie year. But they need to figure out a way to protect Sam Bradford, and then they need to find a way to help him, despite his unwillingness, push the ball down the field a little bit more. There wasn't a draft class last season that was less productive or less impactful than the Vikings under Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer, and they had been doing a terrific job in the few years prior. So they just need to figure out the offense, and I believe even with some of the defections at the cornerback position and elsewhere on defense, that unit looks ready to win right now.
Yeah, plus they lost to the Bears. So, you look at your team, you got to do a lot of...
They got shellacked by the Bears, too, on Halloween.
They came back and won the finale, but, when you're assessing your team and evaluating your team, if you lost to the 2016 Bears, you have a lot of things you need to evaluate.
We'll round out the division. We take a look at the Detroit Lions. The Lions, believe it or not, were 9-4, guys. Anybody remember that? They were 9-4 before they lost their last 5 games of the season, 4 straight at the end of the regular season, and, of course, the playoff game at Seattle. That was a little bit misleading. In reality, the Detroit Lions' 9 wins, one of them was over a team with a winning record. That was Washington at 8-7-1. The other 8 were just beating up on the Little Sisters of the Poor. They could not compete with real playoff teams. And then, of course, once Matt Stafford got hurt, he dislocated that middle finger in that second Bears game. It was all over. That's when the 5-game losing streak started. That said, they were still 9-4 at one point, and certainly in a different stratosphere than the Bears. They don't have as many decisions because they don't have as many good football players, but they do have 2 key decisions on the offensive line. Riley Reif was their first-round pick out of Iowa 5 years ago. He was their left tackle. He's played right tackle. He is going to be in high demand because this is the worst year for offensive linemen and free agency that we've seen in the last decade or two. There is nothing out there, which is bad news for the Bears, who still have a need at left tackle, I believe. But Riley Reif is going to be in demand. Then they've got Larry Warford. And it's interesting because Warford was drafted in the 3rd round in 2013, and he was the other all-rookie guard on the all-rookie team with Kyle Long. When you talk to some of the scouting services, and you actually look at some of the grading reports that teams have on him, some felt that Warford was his better player than Kyle that first year. Now, Kyle Long is a great football player. This isn't about criticizing Kyle Long. Bears are lucky to have him. But Warford is a really valuable asset. The Lions guys are another team that is not in great salary cap shape. It's hard to figure out why when you look at their roster, but they've got an issue in that they got Matt Stafford coming up again next year, and they got to figure out what to do with him. So they probably can only sign one of those 2 players, and they're looking to upgrade this offensive line, not just hold what they had.
And remember, both of those guys were not drafted by Bob Quinn, their second-year general manager, and they weren't there when Jim Caldwell was hired either. So, yeah, that'll be tricky. But to me, the difference between the Lions and the Bears, and I thought the Bears were going to clearly was way off on this, but I thought just from a talent perspective, the Bears had a chance to leapfrog the Lions and get into 3rd place in the division last year. Obviously, that didn't happen, but I still think the difference between the Lions and the Bears is quarterback. Otherwise, the rosters are very comparable, but it's a pretty big difference, and Matt Stafford did take the next step over the past 24, close to 2 years now, or a year and a half, where he's proven He's going to be paid like probably as much as any quarterback in the league when he gets this next deal. So, but they need a lot of help, just like the Bears. Long story short, they need playmakers on defense. They still don't have a run game. Hub mentioned the offensive line issues. So the Bears are chasing all three teams technically, but I think the gap is pretty small between Chicago and Detroit. And the Packers and the Vikings are obviously still a little more sizable.
We've got about 15 minutes left, guys. I don't know if we're set up to take questions or not. We can do it. We'll just have you shout at us in a few minutes. But one more thing to look at here, and we'd love to do the other 7 divisions and all 32 teams, but we'd be here until Friday. There's plenty of good ribs here, but other than that, I think it'd be a long time to hang out. So it is interesting, though, when you look at the available cap space of the 32 NFL teams. We mentioned that Ryan Pace told us they were going to be one of the top 5. Now, right now, they're not, but that's because we do not know what the cap is going to be. The reports I've seen is that the cap will go up as much as $10 million. It could land anywhere between $163 and $165 million per team. There also is the issue of carryover cap space, and what that means is that there is a floor to the salary cap. Not only do you have to spend up to 98% of the cap over a 4-year rolling average, you cannot spend less than 81%. And there are teams that have been underspending, so they carry cap space over. So for instance, even though the cap is going to be $164 million, the Cleveland Browns might have to spend up to $190 million because they haven't been paying anybody. So when you look at the teams based on a $163 million estimate with the most available cap space, first is the Cleveland Browns. This will surprise nobody. They've got $105 million in cap space. That's because they've got no talent, so it's not necessarily a good place to be.
And I'm sure they'll spend it wisely.
Yes, and you will not be shocked to know that number 2 is the San Francisco 49ers with about $82 million in cap space. But it does get interesting after that. Number 3 is the Tennessee Titans, who I think are one of those teams that could be this year's Atlanta Falcons. They did some really nice things in 2016. John Robinson is a first-year GM who made a brilliant trade for DeMarco Murray and an outstanding pick in the first round with Jack Conklin, and now he's got $80 million in cap space. You look at Jacksonville at 5, that shouldn't surprise you. Washington at 6, that's misleading because they've got to re-sign Kirk Cousins. That'll chew up a bunch of that. But what if I told you the 7th most cap space in the NFL going into the offseason with almost $65 million to spend belongs to the New England Patriots? They are not only by far the best team in the league, the best coach team in the league, but they're obviously the best run or managed team in the league because they got plenty of money to spend. This is why you hear smart people like Arthur over there saying, look at Julius Peppers, look at other guys. They sign these 1-year deals that are cap friendly to them. They can afford it because they've created enough space for themselves. Also in front of the Bears is Indianapolis, which is troubling because that includes the mega deal they gave Andrew Luck last year. And then right now you find the Bears sitting there at 9 with $57 million. Right behind them, another team I would worry about, Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers were 15-1 a year ago. You look at the injuries, you look at some of the changes in the secondary, some bad cap decisions last year, they've got $50 million to spend. So, Kevin, you look at these top 10 and you want to catch the big guys, but when you're chasing teams like the Patriots and the Panthers with more cap space than you, that creates a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and that's what kind of the Bears have to figure out, all these teams to figure out, because you look back to last year, and rarely is a team that spent the most money in free agency the team that does well the next year. I mean, you guys remember, was it 2011? The Eagles called themselves the Dream Team. They signed everyone they could, and then they were terrible. But last year, the New York Giants made it work. They spent a ton of money on Damon Harrison, Janoris Jenkins, Olivier Vernon, and we saw how good that defense was, and they made it to the playoffs. So, and the Oakland Raiders spent a lot of money in free agency last year on the offensive line, and they were able to make the playoffs. So those two teams kind of showed you that you can spend a lot, spend smartly, and you can be one of those teams that makes the jump. If you listen to the teams Hub just mentioned, those are a lot of teams that did not make it, that didn't make the playoffs last year. So those are teams that might think they're 1, 2, 3, or if the case of the Bears, Browns, 49ers, 12 pieces away from making the playoffs. So it's going to be how aggressive are these teams, and who do they decide to go after.
And there are cautionary tales, too. The Jaguars spent a lot of money last year, too, and they fired a coach and a general manager and are kind of find themselves mostly in the same place as the Bears. So it's not about just having the money and spending it, but obviously spending it wisely. And there are going to be a bunch of teams who think that they can be the next Giants club Kevin refers to, but it's rare to do that. Even the Raiders, they spent a lot of that money on defense, and the defense was horrible last year. So it's probably, as much as anything, a credit to what the Giants did with Ben McAdoo and with Jerry Reese, and the way those guys fit in on defense was pretty awesome, and again, pretty rare to see. So just a couple of the names that maybe Bears fans or otherwise are going to be interested in. I can tell you, or maybe we'll just start with positions. The cornerback position is going to be terrific both in free agency and the draft, and there are going to be a couple corners that probably don't get the franchise tag. Trumaine Johnson's not going to get it 2 years ago with the Rams. A.J. Boyd, the breakout player for the Texans, may not get it. So there's going to be some guys who are going to get paid a ton at corner. Defensive tackle is going to be very strong. Kawan Short, although he's probably going to get the franchise tag. Brandon Williams, Dontari Poe. The Chiefs have tough decisions with Dontari Poe and Eric Berry. May not be able to keep them both. So those are a couple of the stronger positions in free agency. We talked about how quarterback, offensive line, some of those other areas are going to be a lot tougher if that's a position you're trying to solve with all that cap space.
Speaking of quarterback, we do have one of our questions on Facebook is about Tony Romo. Hub, and that's going to be maybe the biggest story. Certainly quarterback. I mean, if the Bears do cut Jay Cutler, that's going to be another one in Garoppolo. But Tony Romo, what do the Cowboys do with him? Who are the types of teams that would, bring him in? We've talked about the Denver Broncos seem to make a lot of sense. What do you think is kind of how the Tony Romo situation is going to shake out?
Well, and it's a great segue to the last quick point I wanted to make here on the cap, which is we talked about the top 10. There are actually 3 teams in the NFL with no cap space. They're over the cap right now. Now, they can shed players and shed salary and create cap space by renegotiating deals. One of those teams is the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are 30th right now in the NFL. They're $3.8 million over the cap, and they're trying to find a way to sign both Eric Berry and Dontari Poe. That's a little misleading because it was the franchise tag on Berry that put them over the cap. Once they redo that deal, they save some money, but it seems unlikely they can sign both. Number 31 will surprise nobody. The New York Jets are over the cap. How you can be that bad at quarterback and that screwed up in your locker room, in your front office, and be $12 million over the cap is an interesting question. If anybody wants to know if there's any chance Brandon Marshall will be back with the Jets, the answer is absolutely not, because he's part of their cap problem right now. And
We'll be with the Patriots too. Just watch.
Yeah, I think that may be one guy that they won't even put in their locker room, but we'll see what happens. Especially the way Malcolm Mitchell was coming on late in the year. I'm not sure that's something they want to do. 32 is, I mean, I would have predicted this, guys. And the Dallas Cowboys, and you want to know where Tony Romo is going? The Dallas Cowboys are currently $14 million over the salary cap, okay? And so they have no ability to get better, because whether they release or trade Tony Romo, $20 million of his $25 million is dead cap space. So they get no relief by releasing or trading him. Now, they've got to do one or the other. They don't have to do one or the other. The truth is, he only costs them $25 million to keep. They may be better off keeping him for a backup, because I'm not ready to put Dak Prescott in Canton quite yet. But they're probably not going to. He probably is going to move. The contract is not tradable because of the salary cap factors I just gave you, and so they're going to have to release him. And once they release him, he's going to be in a very favorable position. Tony Romo at 37 is not going to take a one-year prove-it deal. He's going to want to go somewhere where he has a chance to win, and he's going to force them to give him a 2 or 3 year deal. To me, there's only 2 teams that you should even be looking at. One of them is the Denver Broncos, and the other one's the Houston Texans. Now, everybody says, wait a minute, Houston just pissed away, excuse me, can I say that on
You can say anything on Facebook.
I
Trust me.
I can say it on cable. I don't know. I'm not on Facebook
on
all that much.
Facebook.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
They just pissed away, what, $76 million on Brock Osweiler. Actually, I think only, what, 32 of that?
37.
Yeah, 37 of it was guaranteed. But you take a look at where the Broncos are at. The Broncos have got $32 million in available cap space. The Houston Texans, even with the bad Osweiler deal, have $21 million in available cap space. I think that you put Tony Romo in Houston, and the Texans are a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I mean, to me, that's the one big difference they have to make. Denver, people think might be more logical, but he may not be that thrilled about the fact that there's a #1 draft pick there in Paxton Lynch, who's going into his 2nd year, who they're not going to want to hold back for 2 more years. So I'm not sure that Houston isn't the better fit than Denver. I'm sure there's people who want to know about Chicago. Yes, Romo is from Wisconsin. He went to Eastern Illinois. He makes no sense for the Bears. The Bears are not going to contend for a Super Bowl for a year or two, maybe in 3, if everything goes right. And that's not the situation that he's looking for. He's not looking to go somewhere just to be a local hero. And then you do have the factor, guys, that the one thing, Jerry Jones and Tony Romo do have a very good relationship. The reason Jones would rather trade him than release him is because Jones's worst nightmare is that Romo signs with an NFC team and then he comes back to haunt the Cowboys. They want him in the AFC. I think that because Jones has been good to Romo, that Romo will at least lean that direction if the AFC team is a better option for him, and of course if the money is equal.
Do you buy the Jerry Jones won't want to lose him to an in-state team, even though they're in the other conference like the Houston Texans?
You know, guys, the difference between me and many is I admit my horrible biases, and I think Jerry Jones has about as much business running a football team as Donald Trump has running this country. So, you know, see, now where I live, I can get cheered for saying that. So it's obviously a little different up here.
Stick to sports,
yeah.
hub.
Oh, yeah, that's coming next. You guys got to follow me on Twitter. You'd enjoy some of that. I've got some real fans out there. I just, you know, I think that stuff's overrated. You know, Jones, listen, once Romo's gone, he's gone. And if he doesn't win, he's got whatever problems he's got. And so, you know, would it bother him that if he's successful in Houston? Probably, especially if Houston went to a Super Bowl and the Cowboys didn't. But I think his bigger concern is getting him out of the NFC.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I know, Arthur, we got a question in the Facebook Live thing about Tony Romo to the Jets, but the way you just described the Jets' salary cap situation, I don't see how they'd be able to make that work. But, yeah, it's weird to think of Tony Romo playing for a different team, but I still keep thinking about the Denver situation. I know you mentioned when Paxton Lynch is there, and you know, but look, we all saw what happened with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. I mean, the best way to do it, if you can, is to stay competitive while having your first-round quarterback wait 2-3 years. And look, Green Bay had the luxury of Brett Favre. They were able to do that. I understand most teams don't have that luxury. But, hey, if you're Denver, you go get Tony Romo, and you can let Paxton Lynch wait another 1-2 years with the defense you have. I don't know, that seems like, and you've talked about before, John Elway, we know that he's interested in this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's a closer. That's how he won his Super Bowl, obviously, as a GM, was recruiting Peyton Manning, winning that. You know, Peyton was the most highly sought-after free agent since Reggie White, probably, and John Elway was the one who closed that deal. So that's the spot I think that Romo likely ends up. When you listen to Texans owner Bob McNair, he says that they don't think that veteran quarterbacks are an option. When you listen to John McClain of the Houston Chronicle, a good friend and the best Texans writer and one of the best NFL writers anywhere, he swears that they're not going after Romo. So I believe him. But I think the Broncos make a ton of sense, and I just don't think it's not a good thing for the Broncos. But Paxton Lynch still isn't ready. The reason he couldn't play last year is because he couldn't pick up the playbook. He's ready physically, not mentally. Now they've got a new offense to learn, a new head coach, but the defense is still terrific, and I think Tony Romo would make a ton of sense there.
Guys, I had to ask you one more question. I probably should double-check myself on this before I do this, but I'm pretty sure that there's one free agent that nobody's talking about because it's such a guaranteed assumption as to where he's going to be. But I do believe Drew Brees is going to be a free agent this year as well, isn't he?
Next year.
That's next year? There's 1 year left on that miserable deal? Okay. Yeah. It's well, you know, I think it is. I think he has the highest salary cap value in the history of the salary cap. I believe the cap hit is about $33 million or something like that. It's never happened before. And that's maybe where I'm confusing things. There's a perception that the Saints could even consider releasing him to get some cap relief with the understanding they'd try and re-sign him. But once you do that, you release a player, then he's got a chance to play the market. You don't want to mess with that. So we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left here, guys. Was there any questions that anybody needed answered? Anything that you're really curious about that we can try and answer for you?
Should the Bears trade their number 3 to get a few draft picks? And how do they evaluate that? Like, I know there's like a calculation or a point scheme. Can you quickly explain that? Or
yeah, there's a point system that is not the Bible, but it is shared by all 32 NFL teams. And I actually, interestingly enough, had a dear friend who is a retired agent reach out to me today with a proposed trade based off that point system. And an example of how it would work is if the Bears were to trade the number 3 pick and their 2 number 4s, they have their own 4 and Buffalo's 4 to Cleveland. Cleveland would give them the 12th pick in the first round, 2 second-rounders, their first pick next year and a third-rounder next year, and that would be equal point value. That's how you would make that deal. Okay, the problem is the Cleveland Browns probably don't want to do that. Okay, well, actually, the Cleveland Browns might do that. That's the good news. Is the Browns. So the answer to your question is yes. And I've got a copy of the sheet. We don't publish it because then I'll get in trouble with teams. But we can calculate what fair trades are. Sometimes you'll hear a deal and it goes off the chart. The deal that Washington made with the Rams 3 years ago for RG3 was unheard of. It was so far off the chart, it was ridiculous. But the deal that the Eagles made this year with the Titans actually made a lot of sense based on the point value. The issue is that you need a willing trade partner. Kevin, Arthur, I think the Bears should absolutely trade down into the middle or the back of the first round because they can get an extra number one, and then I wouldn't mind if they took one of these quarterbacks, but they cannot take one of these 3 quarterbacks with the 3rd overall pick.
Yeah, it's such a tough question because, and you know, I like that idea about trading down, and I think it makes a lot of sense. The Bears are not, if the Bears do it right, they're not going to have a top 5 pick again for a while.
That's
So,
the hope.
yeah, if there is a talent that you think is a once-in-a-generation guy, this is the time to get him when you have the number 3 pick. Now, the Bears, even though we don't think any of the quarterbacks are worthy of it, the Bears might think one of these quarterbacks could be their answer, and then you take him wherever you can. We saw Jared Goff and Carson Wentz were not the first and second best players in the draft last year. They weren't even in the top 10 best players in the draft last year, but they went 1 and 2 because of their position. So I think the Bears should certainly entertain all trade down options, but you look at there's 2 safeties, Jamal Adams, Malik Hooker, who could be top 5, top 10 picks, could be once-in-a-lifetime safeties. The Bears haven't had a good safety since Mike Brown. It's been a long time. And if you got a chance to get one of those guys, I think you take it. Or if you think one of those quarterbacks is the guy, I think you take him at 3. But then again, if you don't think any of those guys are worth it, then you certainly trade down and go grab a couple more players.
Right, I think trading down is a great option. I personally also don't believe any of the quarterbacks will be worth the 3rd pick. I feel strongly about that. But there's some really good corners too, and it's going to be not only a unique safety class, but a really great corner class. And someone like Marshawn Lattimore or Marlon Humphrey of Alabama will both be potentially in play. Jonathan Allen is a popular name in all the mock drafts, so I don't think those guys would be reaches at number 3. We just have to kind of wait and see. It's hard to have this conversation before we see if the Bears do go after Jimmy Garoppolo or what they do to address the quarterback position, because if they're able to solve it before the draft, boy, that frees up a lot more options, and they have a lot more flexibility to move up or down or go ahead and select the best available player.
Yeah, and the one other issue is at 3 and 13, you can't trade too far down because, you know, if you're trying to pile up 1s and 2s next year or the year after, but now you're going all the way down to the bottom of the 1st and the 2nd round, you got another year of horrible football, and people will only be so patient. So I think, I see another question. Yes, sir.
With the draft class being so heavy with safety, will that impact how much free agent safeties get paid? Could that help the Bears?
Well, it's not that it's so heavy with safety. It's got 3 franchise-type safeties. There's 2 or 3 more kids that belong in the 2nd and 3rd round. It's a very good year for safeties because safety's been a down position. But it's not like there's going to be 10 starting safeties coming out of the draft. No, I don't think it has much impact on free agency. Eric Berry was a defensive MVP candidate last year. If he gets away from Kansas City, he's going to get paid. Tony Jefferson is a nice safety with the Cardinals. He's in the free agent market. But other than that, there's not that much to get excited about. One thing that I think Ryan Pace has done an excellent job of is working the 2nd and 3rd tiers of free agency. I thought Danny Trevathan and Jarrell Freeman and Akeem Hicks and, unfortunately, McPhee is going to turn out to be a bad decision because of the knee. But if he had been healthy, those all would have been really nice moves that he made. So I think he gets free agency, and I don't think he's going to overpay for free agents at the top of the tier.
What he said.
Yes, sir.
Do you even know, does anyone know if Alshon even wants to be here? Is he in love with Chicago? Or?
I think Alshon wants to get paid. So if that's here, if that's somewhere else, I think there have been a lot of reports about whether or not Alshon Jeffrey likes being here. I've never bought a ton of those because, for one thing, a lot of guys, it's not like, I don't know, a lot of guys don't necessarily live in Chicago in the off season. They train in different places. He sometimes trains in Florida. If the Bears offer Alshon Jeffrey the best financial package and an opportunity to be the guy, I think he's going to be perfectly fine staying in Chicago. But he certainly hasn't been as effusive for his praise for the city as other guys are. But then again, Alshon Jeffrey's not the type of guy who's effusive with praise for a lot of things. He's a pretty quiet person.
Yeah, Alshon's not a big talker, so it's kind of hard to know. But I think the answer to your question is the magic number is $40 million or somewhere thereabouts and guaranteed. If he has a choice of teams willing to pay him $40 million, he'd rather be in the Southeast. If the Bears are going to be the highest bidder in the $40 million range, then he'll be fine staying in Chicago. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So if the Bears do end up taking Jonathan Allen at number 3, do you think it's possible that Jabril Peppers will fall to them possibly in the second? I know anything's possible, but do you see it possibly happening that Peppers will fall to them in the second round, or would they select him?
Peppers is one of the more controversial players in this draft. Depending on who you talk to, they will tell you he should be the first safety off the board, and the Bears should take him at 3. You can talk to another very highly qualified scout, and they'll say 25, 30, 35. The issue is because he is such a great athlete and he did so much at Michigan, nobody is sure where to put him. They're not sure if he's a cornerback, a safety.
He was invited to the combine as a linebacker today.
And I can tell you he's not a linebacker. It's the Michigan did that for some unique pressure packages that Don Brown wanted to use. There's been some success with Deone Buchanan and Mark Barron in the NFL, but that's not the best use of Julius Peppers. What's interesting about Peppers, and all the crap about his ball skills is ridiculous. I mean, the guy was a receiver, he was a running back, he's a punt returner, a kick returner. That's not an issue. He was a press corner his first year at Michigan, and nobody wanted to throw at him. He's that good in coverage. You get a guy who's 6 foot, maybe 6'1", 210, who can blow you up at safety and cover like a corner. That's the guy you want. I think the consensus is that 3 may be too high, and as much as it pains me to say it, because I'm a Michigan alum, the Ohio State kid probably will go first, Malik Hooker. Yeah. And somebody will be sorry they did that, because they'll probably have to be bailing him out of jail in a month or two.
Can't say anything on Facebook.
All 3 of them, Malik Hooker, Jamal Adams, Jabril Peppers, they're probably the 3 best safety prospects we've seen since the year that Earl Thomas and Eric Berry came out. There's no way any of them are lasting to the second round at 35 or 36. Yes, sir.
There's all kinds of talk about drafting a quarterback. Is there any reason for me to believe that they can actually draft a good one and develop him?
That's a great question. I don't know if there's a lot to go on, and I'm sorry for jumping in here, but our draft expert, Greg Gabriel, he's a former college scouting director for the Bears, and he has been as outspoken about this as anyone in recent months. Just look at what happened with Jared Goff, who had no one to develop him. And don't write off Jared Goff, that'd be silly. He could turn out to be a great player, but he didn't do much. He didn't do anything positive as a rookie, and he didn't really have much of a chance with his supporting cast and his coaching staff. And then you look at the Eagles and Carson Wentz, and while it didn't end well, he was set up a lot better with Doug Peterson and Frank Reich, both former college quarterbacks. Dowell Loggins and Dave Ragone has some quarterback playing experience. Dowell Loggins is pretty limited. So, yeah, I mean, I want to get your guys' opinion, but there's not a lot of proven quarterback developers on the current staff, so that's a great question.
Yeah, I think you can be confident. Dave Ragone's a good quarterback coach. He's kind of new at it, but he played in the league for a little bit. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do with the rookie quarterback. I think the Bears are looking forward to seeing what Dave Ragone can do with a quarterback. I think developing a quarterback is almost more on the team around him. Dak Prescott was great last year, and he did have Jason Garrett as a coach. He was a great person as a coach. He also had the best offensive line in football, one of the best running backs in football, one of the best receivers in football. The Bears have one of the best interior offensive lines in football with Kyle Long, Josh Allen, and Cody Whitehair. You're giving whoever comes in one of the better running backs in the game in Jordan Howard. And if they keep Alshon Jeffrey, you get one of the best, go up and get it receivers. So I think if you're able to surround your quarterback with enough talent on offense, a rookie quarterback can be developed even if the coaches are a little bit green or new at that area of developing. But I do understand as a Bears fan, you have really nothing to work off in terms of, having confidence in this team being able to develop a quarterback.
Yeah, I can only answer you honestly. I agree with Kevin. I think Dave Ragone has a chance to be a pretty good coach. But based on the 2 years that we've seen now, particularly this year, I have zero faith that Dowell Loggins can A, run an offense, or B, develop a quarterback. And so, I'm sorry, but that's what we saw. And I hope I'm wrong, because he's not a bad guy, and he's going to be the coach this year. So we'll see what happens. Guys, we've gone way over time. We're going to take 2 more questions. I got 3 big dogs at home with all 4 legs crossed. So we got to, this gentleman right here, and then we'll come up here. Yes, sir.
If the Bears miss the playoffs again, do Fox and Pace keep their job?
Ryan Pace, yes. John Fox, no. That'd be my guess.
Yeah, I would agree. Now the weird thing is they can go what if they go 9-7? That's a 6-win improvement, and when they miss the playoffs, I feel like John Fox could lobby to keep his job because the 6-win improvement is pretty monumental. But I think it'd be tough. I feel like they really like Ryan Pace. Certainly, I think they would like him to stay.
And you often see GMs get an opportunity to hire a second coach, whereas it's not the same, the shorter leash for the coach or whatever. But I wouldn't concern yourself so much with what these guys just said. I would concern yourself with what they said, I'm sorry, but not so much with the playoffs as tangible signs of improvement. Again, it's a 3-13 team, so even if they get to 500 and there's a lot of progress, I think you can make an argument that Fox returns for the final year of his deal. But again, it's hard to go from a 5-win improvement in one season. That's a lot to do in and of itself.
John had really unrealistic expectations this year because of what happened his second year at Carolina and his second year at Denver. I don't think anybody saw the Bears going 3-13. I thought they'd win 6-7 games again. But considering that he took 2 teams to the Super Bowl in his second year, there was this belief that there was going to be some miracle worked here, and it would have been a miracle. They weren't good enough. So I don't think he's in as much trouble as some fans think. But definitely going to have to show some significant improvement. We got time for 1 more. I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll take 2 more. Go ahead.
It seems to me that in this league, you need to get 30 points to win games consistently every Sunday. And the Bears consistently for the last, 4 or 5 years, lose more points. They can't put them on the board either through play calling, execution. In the red zone, they have to end up for field goals or whatever. And I know you're just alluding on coaching at some point. Is there anything they can do to somehow address this consistently poor playing?
Well, I'm going to defer to you guys, but I think what you just talked about is that they've been looking for a quarterback for 3 decades. And when you talk about the teams that consistently put 30 points on the board, look at who their quarterbacks are. And so the first most important thing is you've got to fix that problem. You got to answer that question. I am still not convinced that Cutler isn't going to go somewhere and become a Pro Bowl quarterback. He's got that kind of talent. He just hasn't been able to get it done for whatever reason. There is no chance in my mind that a Hoyer, a Barkley, even a Connor Shaw, based on what we've seen, is going to be that guy. If you get the quarterback part of it fixed, and then you get your play caller to run the offense the way you believe it has been designed, the way the personnel has been brought in to run it, which is what my dissatisfaction is with Dowell Loggins. He had the ability to do better this year, and he wouldn't call the plays to do it. Now, maybe he just needed a year to get better and get more mature, and he will this year. But you fix the quarterback, you play to the best ceiling, if you will, of the other players that you have, and I'm not sure the Bears are that far away. Jordan Howard is the real deal. I think Jeremy Langford was threatening to be. I think they got a potential great 1-2 punch there. I think Bobby Massey, after a miserable first half, had the concussion, came back, played pretty well the second half. So now you go from right tackle all the way to left guard. You got a really good offensive line with 2 Pro Bowlers at guard. I think they need a left tackle. I love Cam Meredith. I think Kevin White may be okay. A lot of things could go right. We spent a lot of time talking about what can go wrong. So I think for the Bears to get to 30 points, quarterback, play calling, a couple more pieces.
Yeah, you just talked about it. They have the running backs, the offensive line. One of my favorite stats from last year was, I believe, Matt Barkley attempted more passes inside the 10 than Jordan Howard had runs. Now, again, I'm not an offensive coordinator. I just type things on my computer, but I generally would trust Jordan Howard a little bit more close to the goal line than Matt Barkley. But look, the NFL, it cycles, and teams flip it every year. We saw what happened to the Falcons this year. We saw what happened to the Cowboys. If the Bears get the right guy at quarterback, I know it's asking a lot, but if they had a guy who protects the football, they have good enough parts on defense, they could be one of those teams. It's really hard to be as bad as the Bears have been for this many seasons in a row. A few teams can do it. The Bears have found a way to do it, which is kind of impressive in its own right. But I think you get the right quarterback in there, and they can make a run, and part of that is obviously scoring more points.
Absolutely. Franchise quarterback covers up all kinds of deficiencies. We know that. It would also be nice if the Bears had a couple short fields to work with. They had how many takeaways last year?
11.
They need to find more playmakers on defense to help get some of those points as well, because they've had 2 years in a row of record low inability to impact games on defense and special teams. So I think that's a big factor as well.
I take that back. It was 11 turnovers was best with the Falcons and the Patriots. The Bears had 18 takeaways, I think, which was tied for last in the league. Yes, sir. And guys, this really does have to be the last one. I apologize. I think I just blew my entire month's budget on bandwidth, but we've got time for one more, so if you would, please.
I have a question on free agency. There's 3 guys that intrigue me to a certain extent. I don't know if any of them are going to make it through the transition tag, but there's Dontari Poe and Brandon Williams, I think, on the defensive line. And then there's, I forgot the guy's name, but a guy in Cincinnati, offensive tackle.
Not Andrew Whitworth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Whitworth is 36 years old.
Okay, I was just wondering if any of those would be good fits for the Bears.
Whitworth consistently grades out as one of the top 3 left tackles in football, but he's 36 years old. And so you can't really do a long-term free agency deal. And I think what will happen there is the Bengals will give him another 1 year at 8, 9, 10, and he'll probably stay. Everything I'm hearing is that Brandon Williams is going to hit the market because the Ravens have other things that they want to fix, and they've had good luck at identifying guys like Williams in the draft. He is one of the best, what would you call him, a zero technique, I guess. He can play nose tackle, but he is that 2-gapping, run-stuffing tackle. That's an interesting place for the Bears to look. Remember, Ryan Pace went there 2 years ago to get Pernell McPhee. Dontari Poe, I love, and the Chiefs love him. And the problem is, as we described, they don't have the cap space, or don't appear to have the cap space to figure out both Poe and Berry. If I'm the Bears, if the Chiefs can only get one of them, go get the other one, whichever one it is. Break the bank to get either Eric Berry or Dontari Poe. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do, but I think it's. But what's interesting about that, one of the kids that I think could be special on that roster is Eddie Goldman. I mean, of all the guys they've drafted so far, he has shown me the most if he can stay healthy. Now, you never have enough of those guys, so I would absolutely, because you can move Golden out, let him play the 5 technique. You know, Hicks is fine, but he's not special. Even if you draft Jonathan Allen, if you put Jonathan Allen, Dontari Poe, Eddie Goldman, and Akeem Hicks up front, now you got the start of something special. So I think you're on the right track there.
My personal opinion, I would focus on the other positional strength in free agency, which is in the secondary, just because, like Hub said, I think Eddie Goldman's a really good player, and I wouldn't mess with him. To me, that would be like moving Kyle Long, you know, the several times over the past however many years. Just let Goldman stay where he is, try and get healthy, and be a stud difference maker. But I think cornerback, whether it's Trumaine Johnson, Stephon Gilmore, A.J. Boy in Houston, there's going to be a lot of players, and that may be the Bears' biggest need. So that's where I would look.
Hey guys, before we go, if you get a big round of applause for Dan and Lee and John over there. I mean, we just sit up here and talk. I have no idea how this works, how they get us on the web, how they make it all happen. We thank them so much. To Dave and everybody here at the Rib House, guys, thank you so much for being such wonderful hosts. I know I'm going to be back. We're going to be back. Come back often, eat a lot. Stuff is great. Most of all, to all of you guys for coming out, I'll be honest with you, we're pleasantly surprised. We expected to see 2 people here. So thank you. No, I'm kind of half kidding. Thank you all so much for showing up. We really do appreciate it. We do have to get out. We're going to be here for another 5, 10, 15 minutes, though, or at least I will be. I can't speak for them. Any questions we didn't get to, thank you. Thank you very much. ProFootballWeekly.com. If any of you did not, did anybody in here get your Chicago Cubs commemorative World Series book?
We've got 2 to raffle.
Nobody? You are missing the best thing published in the last 5 years. Has nothing to do with the fact that I did it, okay? I mean, if you are a Cubs fan and you don't have a copy of this book, you got to get it, guys. We do have something to raffle off? All right, we're going to raffle some up. I guess everybody's got their raffle tickets and all. We're ready to go? All right, so I guess we can sign off, Dan, and we'll stay and take care of some of the promotional stuff. Thank you all so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.